Hello, this is Mike. In today's validation, we are going to take a look at this thick-walled cylindrical vessel with internal pressure. So as far as the description is concerned, the outside radius that you see here is a 10-inch radius or 20 inches in diameter. The inside radius is 7 inches or 14 inches in diameter, and the height of this structure is 8 inches tall. And then what we're going to do is apply a internal pressure of 10,000 psi and a material that has a Poisson's ratio of 0.3, Young's modulus of 30e6. It is, of course, a quarter symmetry model, so we'll need to add in the appropriate constraints to account for the fact that we've sliced through what would be a full cylinder. And then we'll analyze it and we'll check our stress tensor or hoop stress, and also the radial deflection. So I've already got the model all completed here in the design environment. Let's go ahead into the simulation workspace. And as we go into simulation, it is a static stress. And by the way, if you've been following along in the videos, you know, this is the 10th demo model that I've made, validation model for Fusion. In the next one that we're going to do, we're going to include thermal effects too. So it's so far everything's just been forces and pressures, but finally we'll get into something a little bit different as soon as we do the next model. So anyway, let me go ahead and continue to set this up. As far as the materials are concerned, again, if you've watched some of my other videos, you know that I've created my own library. Because a lot of these validation examples that I have, they use a Poisson's ratio of 0.3 and a modulus of 30e6. I went ahead and created a custom material library, and then I have my own material in there. So it's A36, i.e. I took the A36 material that was in the library and then I copied it and then I modified it so that the Poisson's ratio was 0.3 and the modulus was 30e6. So if we click on properties after I select that, you can see there's the Young's modulus 3e7 and Poisson 0.3. There's a couple videos out there on how to create your own library and then modify materials. There's also a really good help documentation on it, which gives it all step by step. So feel free to check that out if you need to know how to do that. Let's go ahead and say OK to that. Constraints here are going to be pretty simple. Maybe I'll orient the model. That wasn't exactly how I thought that view was going to come out. Let's rearrange the geometry a little bit. How about we look at that view? There we go. So the two circles that I made before I trimmed them down to quarter sections were in the XY plane, and then I extruded this along the positive Z axis. So for my constraints and symmetry, let me uncheck the body. First of all, on this face here, we'll select that face. The vector that's perpendicular is Y. So we're just going to leave UY constrained for the symmetry constraint, which always constrains the out-of-plane translation, and then if you have rotational degrees of freedom, the two in-plane rotations. So let's go ahead and say OK to that one. And then we're going to go ahead and hit constraints. We'll select this face over here. The vector perpendicular is the X, so I'm going to uncheck UY and UZ. Of course, if your model is oriented differently, the construction is different, then of course modify your constraints as necessary. But in essence, with a brick model, you know, envision a full 360-degree cylinder here. We've sliced through it so that we have 1/4 section left. Your symmetry constraints are to constrain the translation perpendicular to that face. And then lastly, let's do the constraint on the bottom of this model. So again, selecting that face, what's perpendicular is the Z, so I'm going to get rid of X and Y, and we'll say OK. All right, at that point, we now have to do the loads. Lots of different loads we can choose from. We're going to do a pressure, select that internal surface, and it is 10 KSI or 10,000 PSI. We'll say OK to that. Next thing that I will do is generate the mesh. So I'm just going to right click here on the mesh in the browser. We'll say generate mesh and take a look at what that looks like and decide if we want to go finer. Let's start with that. We've got 3 elements through the thickness. Looks pretty good. Depending on how far off our results are, we could always choose to go a little bit finer with it. It's one of the nice things about FEA, right? We can run things, take a look at our results, and make adjustments as opposed to physical models where if we screw something up, it might set us back a good bit. So that's one of the reasons to do finite element analysis testing before we ever go to a physical prototype. Let's go ahead and solve this. I think we have everything all set up, so we're going to go ahead and hit solve. I'm going to choose to solve it locally. This should be a pretty short, simple model to solve here. All right, and now we get into the results, and we can see, given how we constrain that and the way that this model deflects, that our symmetry constraints were applied appropriately because it just allows the model to increase radially due to that internal pressure to grow radially. So let's go ahead and take a look at our displacements first. So over here by the legend, we can change to looking at displacement. And then we're going to take a look at something like one of our radial directions. Either that would be either my X or my Y, given as the way that I've constructed this model. So let's take a look at the X, and our max is 0.007515, which is pretty darn good. So if we take a look at what we should have here, according to theory, the hand calculations, we should get 0.007517. So if we type that in, 0.007515, and we hit enter, it's 0.02% different than what the hand calculation tells us it should be. By the way, there's the reference for it, 5th edition Rourke and Young, page 504, table 32, case 1A. All right, and then we're going to take a look at the stress tensor. So let's go ahead and take a look at stress. It's on von Mises by default, but we want the hoop stress. We can take a look at, say, the YY tensor. That'll work. And that gives me a value of 29,450. So if I type that in, 29,400, whoops, typing it in the wrong place. Right there, 29,450, and we hit enter. We are at 0.8% difference, so it's not even 1% different than what the hand calculations would give us. So I think that is in pretty good agreement. So even using the default mesh on it. That's everything for today's presentation. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.